There it is. We're up. Good morning. How are the four of you? Okay, we're going to finish up Ezra, and there's a short chapter in Nehemiah that's the first chapter. I'm going to get into that one. So we're kind of going to go with the continuity. And I think after we finish Nehemiah, as we're finishing Nehemiah, we're going to figure out what we want to do. But I think I want to recommend something out of the New Testament. I don't know what you think, Doug, but we've been going on the Old Testament for months, and I think I'd like to go into the New Testament. So, look at 10. Remember last week what we had was Ezra found out what the problem was. And this week we get to find out what the magnitude of the problem is, but what people decide to do about it. And then we find another problem. So that's why it's good news and some bad news. So, Ezra 10. Now while Ezra was praying and making confession, weeping and prostrating himself before the house of God, a very large assembly of men, women, and children gathered to him from Israel, for the people wept bitterly. Shechaniah, the son of Jehiel, one of the sons of Elam, said to Ezra, "We have been unfaithful to our God and have married foreign women from the peoples of the land. Yet now, there is hope for Israel in spite of this." So, how long do you think he was weeping and confessing and praying in front of God? An hour? A day? I would say at least a day, maybe a couple days. Yeah, you got to have time. As you said, all these people have to gather. The men, the women, the children, they've been seeing what's going on. He's been doing this continually. What was he confessing? Did Ezra do anything wrong?
Say that again?
Did Ezra do anything wrong?
Well, he used the word we. He included himself.
He did. But did he take a foreign wife? No, he didn't take one. You're right. He didn't take one. Okay, but he was confessing the sins of Israel. What was he most likely praying for? The people. Okay. What did they just come out of? Captivity. Why did they go into captivity?
Because it is the same principle.
Because the same thing they're doing now. You know, you can see where Ezra's mind is in his prayers. What do you think made the people respond? If Ezra would have said, "Oh, that's terrible," and cried for like a half hour or something like that, as opposed to a day, maybe a couple days, do you think that was what really got their attention to say, this scribe that came down, that's been leading us, that we got the temple rebuilt because of him and everything like that, because of God, but because of his righteousness? You think that got their attention? You think if it had been a short amount of time, he'd have been crying and weeping and praying and everything else, that it would have been?
Take it anymore. He's crying and weeping.
That may have been said. You know, said. We understand just how bad this is, because they've been living with this for a while. What do you think Shechaniah said that got his attention?
Well, he admitted he was wrong. He admitted the problem. They forgot unfaithful to God, and they married foreign women.
We've married foreign women.
Their practices.
But there's hope.
Yes.
But there's hope.
Always hope.
Okay? And I'm not sure Shechaniah was looking at it as there was any hope. Now, let us make a covenant with our God to put away all the wives and the children, according to the counsel of our Lord, and of those who tremble at the commandment of our God. And let it be done according to the law. Arise, for this matter is your responsibility, but we will be with you. Be courageous and act. So what was Shechaniah's proposal?
Well, first of all, how are you going to put away all the women or the wives and children? Hey,
Put them away is you send them off. But that's what he said. And the children. And that's not going to be something that's going to be easy. We'll get to that in a minute. Whose responsibility to implement Shechaniah's proposal?
responsibility, so I guess it's the people's.
Look at that last verse. Arise, for this matter is your responsibility. Now, he's talking to Ezra. He said, Ezra, you need to go make this happen. What's the reasoning behind it becoming Ezra's problem and not the leadership's problem?
You're not going to be liked very well.
This is probably true. There's a lot of wives that are not going to like you anymore. Who is the one who was the spiritual leader that said, this is wrong? It was Ezra. The leadership, up until this particular point, didn't see anything wrong with it at all. Matter of fact, we're going to get into it. The leadership was part of the problem. The only one who, there was a few, but Ezra was one of the few that was uncolored or tainted by this particular sin. Wasn't he? He was probably one of the few. Let's go on. Then Ezra arose and made the leading priests, the Levites, and all Israel take oath that they would do according to this proposal. So they took the oath. Then Ezra arose from before the house of God and went into the chamber of Johanan, the son of Eliashib. Although he went there, he did not eat bread nor drink water, for he was mourning over the unfaithfulness of the exiles. So it's interesting it refers to them as exiles here. So what did Ezra do first? All Israel, but the Levites, mostly. The leading priests and the Levites. So that they didn't get themselves in this back. And there's more to it that he gets to a little bit later in this particular chapter to say why it was so much with the leading priests and the Levites to take this oath. What did he do second? He fasted, okay? Ezra was still in a mode of saying, this is going to be a big deal. He knew this was going to be hard for the people that were there. There was a lot of people there by this particular time. They made a proclamation throughout Judah and Jerusalem to all the exiles that they should assemble at Jerusalem, and that whoever would not come within 3 days, according to the counsel of the leaders and the elders, all his possessions would be forfeited, and he himself would be excluded from the assembly of the exiles. So who is the they that made the proclamation?
The leaders that didn't do their job in the first place.
The leaders that didn't do their job in the first place. That's right. It's the Levites and the leaders that made this particular proclamation because they had made the oath. Remember, they made the oath with Ezra, said that we're going to go do this, and they said, okay, we're going to go do this. Why'd they give 3 days? Yeah, I don't know how far people had moved away from Jerusalem, but we're going to find out this is a time of year where you might have to have gotten your crops in or something like that in order to get there. So there's enough time, but it should be plenty of time. They shouldn't have dispersed that far away from Jerusalem at this particular point. Put some teeth in this. What was it? Yeah, we're going to take everything away that you've got, and you're ostracized from society. You're out. So, all the men of Judah and Benjamin assembled at Jerusalem within 3 days, which is interesting. All of them did. It was the 9th month and the 20th of the month, on the 20th of the month, and all the people sat in the open square before the house of God, trembling because of this matter and the heavy rain. Then Ezra the priest stood up and said to them, "You have been unfaithful and have married foreign wives according to the guilt of Israel. Now therefore make confession to the Lord, the God of your fathers, and do his will, and separate yourselves from the peoples of the land and from the foreign wives." So why were the people trembling?
You got some special effects going on. Not only is this, you got some heavy rain, there's probably lightning. Who knows? It might be like New Orleans tonight.
Might be. The gravity of the affair, their unfaithfulness, they were trembling because of that. Have you ever been sitting in the cold rain? You get cold, don't you? Okay? And this is the rainy time of year in Israel at this particular time. I don't think Israel has a rainy time of year now. But the climate wasn't the same then as it was now. Okay? It was cooler. It was rainy. It was wet. Remember when they went into the land of Canaan? It was a land where you cut off a thing of grapes and 2 men could barely carry it because there was so much there. So who assembled in the square?
Apparently all the men.
All the people. And I'm thinking it was probably more than men, because it says, so all the men of Judah and Benjamin assembled in the square. So they took foreign wives. Why was he so distressed? What was the big deal?
With it.
Exactly. That was the problem, is they're going to take foreign gods, introduce them into the family, introduce them into the house, and at that particular time, they're going to start moving towards worshiping those foreign gods. It wasn't necessarily the wife, it was what the wife brought, and the fact that she would pull the husband away. You have a different situation with Ruth, don't you? With Naomi, your people are my people, your God is my God. She was a Moabite, but she said, your God is my God. She transitioned the other way. But unfortunately, most of it was the men would transition over to pagan gods from what the wife brought into the household. Then all the assembly replied with a loud voice, "That's right. As you have said, so it is our duty to do. But there are many people, it is the rainy season, and we are not able to stand in the open. Nor can the task be done in 1 or 2 days, for we have transgressed greatly in this matter." So what did the assembly agree to do? All the men, what did they agree?
Get rid of the foreign influence.
Get rid of the foreign wives and the children that went with it. Okay? They said, this is what we're going to go do. What did the people say that recognizes just how pervasive this was, the magnitude of the problem?
It's going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah, it's going to take more than a few days. If we're going to do it and do it the right way, it's going to take some time. Okay? Because they didn't want to just drop the wives and the children on their head. I mean, they loved them. But they had to do something to get rid of that influence. Let our leaders represent the whole assembly, and let all those in our cities who have married foreign wives come at appointed times, together with the elders and the judges of each city, until the fierce anger of our God on account of this matter is turned away from us. Only Jonathan, the son of Hashiel, and Jehaziah, the son of Tikvah, opposed this, with Meshullam and Shabbathai, the Levites, supporting them. So why did the people recommend as a course of action? What did they recommend and why? They knew God was angry with them. Okay? But they said, let us go to the judges and the elders in the cities. So they had spread out some. That's part of the reason why they needed the 3 days. So they needed to do in their own individual areas to figure out how they're going to disposition this particular situation and say, we want to take care of it, but we don't want it to turn into a disaster. Okay? So who opposed the action? Was it unanimous? It looked like it was unanimous. Huh?
It says Jonathan.
Jonathan did. And the son of Tikvah, don't say what his name is, they opposed this with Meshullam and Shua. It's interesting. 2 Levites. What was the Levites' job? What were Levites to do? It's Jewish society.
Oversee the worship service.
Oversee the worship service. And they opposed this.
It's because their wives told them to.
Probably so. They were working on the rule, happy wife, happy life. But the exiles did so, and Ezra the priest selected men who were the heads of fathers, households for each of their fathers' households, all of them by name. So they convened on the first day of the 10th month to investigate the matter. They finished investigating all the men who had married foreign wives by the first day of the first month. So how long did it take? How many months are in the Jewish calendar when it's not a leap year? Because in a leap year they add one. How many months? There are 12. Just like ours. So they started October the 1st, what would be our October the 1st. It was in their same month. They have their own names for their months. And they finished January the 1st. How long did it take? 3 months. October, November, December. All month long, those months. It took them 3 months to work through this issue and figure out how to do this without it turning into a disaster. Without a whole bunch of women being just thrown out on the street, kids thrown on the street, no way for them to take care of themselves. This is a really tough problem to go work. I'm not going to read all the sons, but you can see the list. But look at the beginning. Among the sons of the priests who had married foreign wives were found the sons, and you can read through all of those. That's a pretty long list. And you get down into the lower part in verse 24, which is the last verse on the page. Of the singers, there was Eliashibib, and of the gatekeepers, Shallum, Telem, and Uri. What stands out about this group of individuals? Gesundheit. What was all these guys? What was their job? What was their job? They led the worship. They were the ones who were supposedly keeping people in the direction of following God. They had all married foreign wives, so when they did the temple worship and then went back home, here was sitting this foreign god in his home for worship. Amazing. I'm sure that, I think if it was a rank and file people, I don't think Ezra would have reacted as strongly as he did when it was all pervasive in the temple too. It was like nobody was following God. Yeah, they were going through the motions. Yeah, it was a job. I'm punching the clock. I get to do it from 8 to 5. And when I'm done, I go home, and then I'm with my wife and my kids, and we have a nice worship service to the little God sitting on the shelf. Then we have the rest of them. So that group is a group by itself. And then we have the magnitude, and I am not going to read through all these names. Unless you want to, Doug. But you got a ton. You can see it's pervasive. The next page, it continues. These are all the guys, the heads of the households that married foreign wives. In 44, it says, all these had married foreign wives, and some of them had wives by whom they had children. So there wasn't children with all of them, but there was children involved. There were your sons, your daughters, as well as your wife. So that was the situation. What indicates how widespread marrying foreign men was in Jerusalem? Just how many people were involved, right? I mean, how might they have gotten in this situation? Remember, Zerubbabel was the one who came down originally, and he had some Levites, and he had people who were the other tribes, but it would have been Judah and Benjamin. But when people came down from Babylon back to Jerusalem to build the temple, who was it primarily that came? Men. I don't think a lot of women came back. And it's been a while. If I'm right in what I said, which Artaxerxes it is, because that's the one who had them rebuild the temple, that gave Ezra the commission to rebuild the temple, it's been 100 and something years. If they didn't have a lot of women there, what did they think? I want a wife. Start looking around to see who's available. Start marrying the women around there, because there weren't enough women that were possibly there. Doesn't say that. This is just supposition of Chuck.
If a society goes 100 years without having women involved, you don't have kids, you don't have generations, there's nobody to pass it on to.
Right.
So the society dies worse than it would have in Babylon.
But if the situation is, I mean, they could have gone back to Babylon to go find a wife and then brought it back down again. And some probably did. But a lot of them didn't do that. And the situation became where it was accepted. It was okay. We've been doing this for a long time. What's wrong with it? That's kind of how things can creep into wherever you are with worship to God, is people start to introduce it. Well, it's a little bit wrong, but society says it's okay. And that's the exact situation they got into. Was the reasoning wasn't following God. The reasoning was, yeah, but it's okay. It's a special situation. There may not have been enough women around to marry for wives and everything like that. And then it got just kind of accepted. In fact, that it got so pervasive in the temple worship and the people who were responsible for leading God, you can kind of see it. They just got themselves into a comfortable situation where they just said, well, you won't pay much attention to that. It's what can happen in the church today, can it? The world has values that they're pushing on the church. Always have. Always will. And when people kind of say, well, yeah, but we ought to be, this or that about it, it's like, no. I ought to try and follow what God wants. Let's get into Nehemiah. Nehemiah follows Ezra. And here's the words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah. Now it happened in the month of Chislev, in the 20th year, while I was in Susa the capital, that Hanani, one of my brothers, and some of the men from Judah came, and I asked them concerning the Jews who had escaped and had survived the captivity and about Jerusalem. So here you have a situation where some of the men in Jerusalem have come back up to Babylon. So they could have come back to get wives, but a lot of them just didn't. So here's a map of kind of where we are. You've got Babylon here, you've got Susa right here, and you've got Jerusalem over here. So that gives you an idea where Susa is. I always like to find out where it is on the map, so I can kind of figure out what's going on, where we are. So what's the significance of Susa? Where is it? It's deep in the heart of the Persian Median Empire, right? You can see Media right here. That's where the Medes. Remember Darius the Mede? Cyrus the Great, he was from down here in Persia. It was these two leaders that got together and took care of the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar and got rid of the Babylonian kingdom and took over that particular one. So these are two cities that are pretty significant. What's the significance of Susa? Does anybody remember? We'd have to go back to Daniel.
That's where Nebuchadnezzar's like summer palace was.
Yep. That was the summer palace. But it was the palace. It was the seat of power when he went to his summer house. Does that give a hint of what Nehemiah does? If you're in an area where it is the summer palace for the king, what does that say about what your responsibility is? You're somehow involved in the king's court. You have access to the king. They said to me, the remnant there in the province who survived the captivity are in great distress and reproach. And the wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are burned with fire. You think that's the only thing Hananiah told Nehemiah and his friends told to Nehemiah? Just one thing? How are things there? The gates have all been burned and the walls are knocked down. Who knocked the walls down and who burned the gates and just tore everything up? Who led that? Remember? Nebuchadnezzar. Didn't leave one stone on top of another stone. Razed Jerusalem to the ground. Okay? The walls are still pretty much like that. I think there was a lot more that they discussed with him, but that's the thing that really stuck in Nehemiah's mind, which is the reason for the whole book of Nehemiah, is this particular issue that he picked out of all the information that Hananiah and his friends passed on, his brother passed on to him. If you were there, and you were Hananiah, and Nehemiah asked you that question, what would the first thing you have said about what was going on in Jerusalem? What was the big thing that was in Cyrus's decree and Artaxerxes' decree to go do? Rebuild what?
The temple.
The temple. The temple it's 60 cubits by 60 cubits high. All that gold wasn't to go buy stuff. All that gold was decoration too. All the stuff that was inside there was overlaid with gold inside the temple. That would have been the first thing I would have said to him, to say, the temple is restored, worship is restored, the temple is great, okay? It's magnificent. It's back the way it was because it's huge. And 60 cubits by 60 cubits, that's 90 feet by 90 feet high. I don't know how they in that particular time with the tools that they had, build the temple that was 90 feet high, but they did. Why do you think Nehemiah only records this fact?
It's kind of, what's the right word to put it? Even though it doesn't speak of the other thing, it indicates the whole picture.
The whole picture, but
It's
also,
a spiritual problem.
when we have good news and bad news, what mostly remember? Bad news. We hear good, and we hear bad, and people say, oh, I heard this. Don't we? Don't we kind of do that? Don't we focus in on the negative versus the positive? Maybe not. When I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days. And I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven. I said, I beseech you, O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who preserves the covenant and loving kindness for those who love him and keep his commandments. Let your ear now be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your servant, which I am praying before you now, day and night, on behalf of the sons of Israel, your servants, confessing the sins of the sons of Israel, which we have sinned against you, and I and my father's house have sinned. So Nehemiah offers a prayer. That's his response, isn't it? His response is not to be angry. His response is to say, God, be merciful. I know who you are. I know you love us. Hear my prayer. And it's day and night. So Nehemiah is praying consistently. He's over and over and over to God about what he sees. What's the situation in Jerusalem because the walls are down? What are walls good for? Protection, okay? And you've got this temple, and Artaxerxes has put out his edict that says anybody who messes with them, okay, you're going to answer to me because I told you not to do it. Is that going to stop it? It's not going to stop thieves. Anybody who wants to get in there and steal stuff, they can because there's no walls. There's no protection. And the people are vulnerable to the thieves and things like that are running around the area. We have acted very corruptly against you and have not kept the commandments, nor the statutes, nor the ordinance which you commanded your servant Moses. Remember the word which you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though those of you who have been scattered were in the most remote part of the heavens, I will gather them from there, and I will bring them to the place where I have chosen to cause my name to dwell. Doesn't all this indicate that what Hanani and his friends told Nehemiah was a whole lot more than the walls haven't been built? The news had to come back from Hanani that said, they've married foreign wives, they're doing this, they're not doing that. What's Nehemiah's concern? What's he concerned about? What's first and foremost in the minds of those that were taken into Babylonian captivity, were slaves underneath the Babylon rule, and now they still live in the regions which is now Mede-Persia, mostly the Babylonian areas. What's first and foremost in their mind?
He's talking about the fact that these people haven't kept the commands, but he's worried that, they've already gone into two kind of captivities, and he's worried that God's just going to scatter them, and all of Israel is going to go away.
All of Israel's just going to go away as an entity because God's just going to get fed up with them. We got in this situation, going into captivity for the exact same things that Hanani has just told me were going on in Jerusalem. Didn't we learn anything? And so he's praying for God that God would forgive him. He knows what's going on. His response is similar to the response of who? Ezra. When Ezra found out just how corrupt they'd become and how far away they'd gotten away from the law of Moses, I'm sure in Ezra's mind is to say, didn't we learn anything? Here we are, and we got in this situation because we left God. We ignored what he wanted us to do. We went against foreign gods, and Nehemiah gets some of the same information. And so he's praying. Was building a wall ever commanded? That's a closed-ended question. I love those when Doug asks those. Oh, did you? I think somebody said no. You said no. No, it was never commanded. The only inference to building a wall is in Daniel 25. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 72 weeks. It will be built again with the plaza and the moat, even in times of distress. So there's a prophecy that it's going to be built, but it's still not a commandment. The commandment was to build the temple, not to rebuild the wall.
But even the wall, when, like in Daniel, when Nebuchadnezzar came in, the wall was there, but it was besieged, and they came in through the moat or through the river under the town.
That was Babylon.
No, was it Babylon? Yeah, Babylon came into Jerusalem that way, right?
Yeah, Babylon, Cyrus came in because he diverted the Euphrates River and marched in the riverbed and took it.
Built wall of Israel.
God was the real wall. But the problem is they left him. They left the real wall that was really protecting him spiritually and physically. But they did not have a decree. But what it left them open to influence. You had wives and the children you got rid of, but you still got the influence. People are coming in to do trade and everything like that. All those kinds of things in Jerusalem because, the people had crops. People came from around. They would shop, buy food, do exchanges, trade, things like that. There was no way to control that. So you're still going to have the influence from the people around you. And you couldn't control it. You didn't have any walls to control it. Anybody can come in any way they want. They are your servants and your people whom you redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand. O Lord, I beseech you, may your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and the prayer of your servants who delight to revere your name, and make your servant successful today, and grant him compassion before this man. Now I was the cupbearer to the king. What man? Last, your servant successful today, and grant him compassion before this man. Who do you think that man is? We got about 3 minutes. How has God made everything work so far?
He put it in the heart of the king.
Exactly. So who's the man?
The king of Persia.
The king, okay? He's the one who can make it happen. And I believe it's still Artaxerxes. I hadn't looked far enough ahead, but I think it's still Artaxerxes at this particular time. What's Nehemiah, what does he want to do?
As he follows that up with, was the cupbearer of the king, he seems like he'll be the messenger to carry this to the king.
Yeah. But remember, these are Persian kings, not known for their kindness, okay? Artaxerxes found the decree from Cyrus, but you're going to see the influence through here as far as God. He responded to the prayers. He enabled the situation. But is there a difference between rebuilding the temple and rebuilding the wall around Jerusalem? Which one's a bigger project?
Wall of Israel.
I'm talking about the physical wall.
I know.
Which one is a bigger project? Huh?
What's the question again?
Which is a bigger project, to build this temple that was 90 feet by 90 feet, or to rebuild the wall around Jerusalem? I would say the wall would be at least an order of magnitude, in other words, 10 times more difficult, because there's miles of wall that go all the way around Jerusalem, and it's not a wall that's up to here. I think it's a wall about like 20 feet high. And there's a lot, and the gates have to be rebuilt, and that's not going to be simple to rebuild them and hang the gates and things like that. So this is a big, big job that Nehemiah is going to, he wants to go do. His heart says, I got to go do this. And it's going to take a lot of money. Remember we said $46 million is how much they went down to rebuild the temple? Well, it's going to probably take more money to rebuild the wall than it was to rebuild the temple. And it's going to be a lot more controversial to rebuild the wall of the temple, because they're going to, remember what they said when they sent the first letter? They said, they rebuild that wall, they're going to rebel against you. You're going to have people that are going to be whispering and all kinds of problems. Remember that part in Daniel that I read? It'll be done in times of distress. The distress is going to be everybody who wants to stop them. Everybody who wants to stop what God wants done. So we're going to go into Nehemiah. Nehemiah is a easier book than Ezra. I don't think, there's no prophets in the time of Nehemiah. Is there? I don't think there's any prophets at all, so we won't take a side trip on that one to talk about prophets. Questions, comments on Ezra? Ezra was all about getting the temple rebuilt. Nehemiah is all about getting the wall rebuilt and reestablishing Jerusalem as an entity, as God's people, as God's city. And it's pointing towards the Messiah. Sing the one.